Welcome to Season 6 of the Dramatists Guild Presents Talkback, sponsored by the Dramatists Guild Foundation. I'm your host, Christine Toy Johnson. We're so happy to be back. And this season is all about reinvention. With so much change going on in our industry and our country, I wanted to sit down with some of my fellow writers who also serve on the Dramatists Guild Council and ask them about the many ways they're writing in and about the moment we're in. I hope you'll be as inspired and fascinated by their responses as I've been. In this two-part episode, I sit down with two of my fellow officers, Amanda Green and Branden Jacobs-Jenkins, for some real talk about how writers get paid or not, remembering what we offer to the field, and how we're aiming to reawaken the power of being together in community at the Guild. Amanda Green is a two-time Tony-nominated lyricist, composer, and the first female president of the Dramatists Guild. Her Broadway shows include Mr. Saturday Night, Hands on a Hard Body, Bring It On, and High Fidelity. Branden Jacobs-Jenkins is a Pulitzer Prize-winning, two-time Tony Award-winning playwright and vice president of the Dramatists Guild. He's also the recipient of a MacArthur Genius Grant and too many other accolades to mention in one episode. Here we go. I'm so excited to be talking to the two of you today for the reboot of Talkback.
Yay!
Talk your back.
Thank you. Madam President Amanda Green is here, and Mr. Vice President Branden Jacobs-Jenkins.
It's not a thing.
Unfortunately, Chris Diaz could not be with us today, but we'll talk behind his back.
I love
Excellent.
It.
Yeah.
Like that.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So I wanted to start with talking to amongst the officers of the Dramatists Guild, because we have been spending a lot of time, especially over the last year, 6 months, talking about our mission and how we can best serve writers and how we can best amplify the work that we want to do together. And so I wanted to start with just bringing up the question, why the Dramatists Guild? What does it mean to you? Words of inspiration, insight, whatever you want to say.
Well, I think the Dramatists Guild is so important because it's the only group that is us, that is theater writers looking out for the welfare and concern of other theater writers. We, that's our singular focus. There are lots of organizations, and there's Equity and there's SDC and there's BCEFA who does fantastic work, but this is really about us looking after our professional interests. And there's still so much that people don't realize about theater writers.
Yeah.
The fact that, I work, working alongside directors who actually are shocked that we don't get a paycheck. And most people don't realize that writers aren't paid for their labor. There's a saying, they always said that as a theater writer, you can't make a living, but you can make a killing. And that's become almost obsolete as well. It's really hard to make any kind of living, and it's almost impossible now to even make a killing, wouldn't you say? So I
don't know anyone who's made a killing.
Yeah, we know Lin-Manuel Miranda has made a killing, and deservedly so. But that's a model that is not sustainable for most mortals.
And yet every year there's some sort of news event about how that's the highest grossing, Broadway season in history, and that is not being reflected in the compensation to writers, honestly. And probably a lot of people in the field, but definitely not writers.
And I think people don't also realize how long it takes from the first idea, writing the first word, to the production, and then from there to seeing any kind of money.
Yeah, well, I think it's. We've sort of veered a little bit to talk about Broadway, which is like supposedly the holy grail, which is not true for many writers, but for those for who it is kind of a fallacy that once you get there, you'll be making big bucks. That has not been the case. I've talked about my first 7 years from my first Broadway show, and then like showing up at that first rehearsal, and the the stage manager passing out, or the company manager passing out the checks and like walking by me, and I was like, oh wait, it doesn't start now? I thought it was now. And it doesn't. It
actually maybe it never starts for some people.
It maybe never starts. Yeah, that show didn't do well. And
you closed early, you deferred payment,
Yeah, I got a tiny advance because it was my first show. I made no money, really no money. So Broadway is not a guarantee that you will make a living.
And I've honestly made more money off Broadway than I made, in this year. I mean, and I think that, like, in some ways I feel the industry trying to deal, everyone's saying it's a good time to do plays. It's because all the producers have cottoned on to the fact that there's actually been tremendous value created off Broadway in this like bumper crop of writers, who do well very regionally. If you look at even if you look at something like the Pulitzer Prize, a substantial number of the last several didn't go to Broadway.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
Ebony Booth's Primary Trust. If you look at the kind of American Theater magazines, like most produced plays, a lot of those are not Broadway plays, right? So actually a lot of playwrights stand to make money by not going to Broadway, which is a new idea, right, that no one's quite talking about.
Let's circle back to the first question about why the Dramatists Guild and how the Dramatists Guild continues to fight against exploitation of playwrights, even though we are talking about the truth of the pay structure. How else are you seeing the Guild?
I mean, for me, the Guild I always call it like the watering hole. I think that I was drawn to the Guild and honestly brought to the Guild by the great Marcia Norman, who was my teacher, because she had this saying that, the only people who look out for writers are other writers. I think that's the truth, honestly, throughout universally acknowledged, or not so universally acknowledged. But one of the major benefits of the Guild is actually putting generations of writers or writers of different stripes in conversation who would otherwise never have any interaction, right? Like, we're not running into each other in our own rehearsal rooms, and yet that kind of knowledge sharing becomes really tremendous because we need to be able to ask the right questions of our collaborators, of our representation, and you're not going to learn that anywhere else. You're not going to learn it by doing it, right? I think we're also very good at sort of self-education. I think that we have the Dramatists magazine, which I think does a very great job for a lot of people of really breaking down what a commission is, demystifying things like money, like copyright, like relationships with directors. And that's what every writer needs, that kind of apprenticeship. Like, I think all arts professions are ultimately apprenticeship professions, right? So I think that's something that we do very well.
Absolutely. And I mean, it was founded to stop the exploitation of writers. We didn't have copyrights. We didn't own our copyrights. Anyone who produced our show could slap their name on it and say they were co-writers. And I mean, it is one of the great things that keeps us all writing for the theater, even though it's such an infuriating thing, is that we own our words. We have dominion over our work. No one's allowed to change it. That is thanks to the Guild. And it's like, it was a battle that was fought long ago, but it's a battle that is being fought every day still. And as Branden said, like, we care about each other, and we care. You're so siloed as a writer because, with actors, you're in a group, you're a thing so it's a chance for us to get together and say, how's it going for you? What's happening over at your neck of the woods? And information sharing, we've really learned so much in community. And I think that's one of the things that the Guild, it was one of its greatest strengths. I mean, not only our council, but we do have a council of way too many people, so many people, but get us together in a room and we can really learn from each other in a way that we don't. Even people who have great agents and great lawyers, it's you and them, and this is us talking to each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the community aspect is so important. I know we're talking about having more community conversations amongst people who are working in the same sectors and cities.
Affinity groups, yes, because as Broadway, off-Broadway, LORT, off-Broadway, there's theater across America, and I mean, your plays are done all over America, and I would just you know, I've worked in various states, but I mean, there's such a robust, vibrant theater scene, and everything's getting harder
Exactly.
across the country.
I think one of the hardest, I mean, I always talk about this in meetings that I suspect that writers have been divorced from their identity as like economic actors, right? But we actually are the reason why people get jobs. Like it's because we sit down and do our work that a designer has anything to design, a director has anything to direct, an actor has anything to act. That doesn't work the other way around, really.
Yes.
And I also think that people forget that the theater has undergone such tremendous shifts in the last 30 years alone. I mean, look at what's happening with nonprofits. You know, there's regional theaters, there's university theaters, there's youth theaters, there's what we do here in New York, our lovely hallowed ground. But there's a million ways to make a living as a theater artist that didn't exist however many years ago, and a lot of the kind of contractual terms and language we have not kept up with that evolution and explosion of different ways of doing, right? And that's part of our work coming together, is trying to go like, okay, like we need to refresh something. What are we refreshing? You know, what needs to be, how does your rehearsal process work versus mine? And are you being exploited? Am I being exploited? How do we kind of like find common ground across these different kind of subgenres of the art form, you know?
Yeah, I think that's so important to remind ourselves about the network that is national and why we gather so many people together. I want to ask you, what do you think are the biggest priorities that we need to be focusing on in terms of protecting our fellow writers right now? What's on the top of your list?
I think basically standard practices as they pertain to creative labor outside of sitting at our laptops and writing what comes to our minds. You know, our jobs are really multifaceted, and we're managers, we're consultants, we don't get paid to be in auditions, actually. Right? Though we want to be, in theory, we want to be part of auditions, but what does it mean that we're giving that courtesy, and what's the power dynamic between myself and a producer and a director and a casting agent, right? That's like not legislated, right? I think about, there are some places that are kind enough to pay the fee for writers to be in rehearsals. I'd like to see that become a standard practice, because sometimes you're directing the show quietly, depending on who you're working with. Sometimes you're meeting with the designer and you're fixing a design, and these are things that are not recognized as labor for us, but require expertise.
Let's talk a little bit about why we are not a union, because of the rights that actually we have to be there and to retain the rights to give the input and everything that we want to say, what we've just.
Let's do positive and negative.
You're right. I'm like, you take positive.
Yeah. Okay.
Well,
positive.
clearly positive and negative.
Exactly,
yes.
Okay.
I also want to announce that we are 3 Capricorns with birthdays within a couple of days of each other.
Which is why it works.
Which is why it works.
Yeah.
And then Christopher Diaz on the other side.
Is the yin to a very large
yang.
Yes,
exactly. So anyway, Amanda, why don't you tell us the positives of why we're not a union?
The positives is that the Guild fought for us to retain our copyrights and to have a bill. We have a Bill of Rights as writers, which affords us. We have approvals over casting, over who directs our show, who's the sound designer, costume designer, lighting designer, etc. No one is allowed to change a word or a note or a lyric without our permission. And we have the right to be at rehearsals. It's such a different experience. Branden has vast more experience working in film and TV, but the little I've done, it's just sort of like you write something and they go like, we had 12 other people working on it. You're like, okay, and you get paid, but you have very little control over that. So the positives are that this last musical, Regency Girls, I've been working on for 7.5 years. But I finally, I had the experience of the show I thought of and me and my collaborators thought of is the show we saw on stage. Amazing. Which is like, whew. Yeah. And that's a very satisfying experience that doesn't happen a lot in film and TV.
And it really can't be underestimated that you do have the right to set your own value and set your own terms creatively with this, but you have to have the willpower to stand by that idea.
You do.
Right?
It's a job.
It's a job. It's a job to remind people that your work is worth what it's worth. The negatives of why we're not a union, yes, is primarily it's that we can't collectively bargain, right? So it's very difficult for us to, as a field, fight against price. What's the word I'm looking for here? The way that everyone's just underbid in general. It's a practice of underbidding. It's very difficult to come together and talk about things like price fixing, which I'm using the wrong words here. What's the phrase where we have to
collective bargaining of going like, well, they made this so I can make, yes.
Right.
Setting prices.
Setting minimums, setting minimums and also,
minimums.
And basically, establishing best practices across the field when it comes to compensation. Because, we operate with numbers that have not changed even to deal with like the cost of living increases for the last decades.
And
I literally had to explain to my agent that a minimum now is not worth what it was, 15 years ago. So I don't want to be told that I should be happy with that.
Yeah.
Also, to piggyback on that, and the reason why we can't collectively bargain is because we are technically business owners, that is the legal reason, and it's built on a fallacious argument that we are on the same par. We are business owners in the same way that commercial producers are business owners, and we're just not. We are, one person or at the most four people, but who don't have the money or the bargaining power, and so it's. For that reason, we are hobbled from being able to collectively bargain.
And I would say I'll acknowledge that one kind of complaint we hear a lot is like, why don't we have health insurance, right? And this has to do with not being
from
union,
fellow writers, yes,
fellow writers.
If
and
you're
again,
so great, why don't you get us health
and actually
insurance?
and I think people say that with like half of an understanding of something like the Writers Guild, but actually in a union you pay a portion of your income into a health fund.
Right.
That's how a union works. And if we ask ourselves why we don't have the health fund, it might be because we're not paid enough to sustain one. Right? So it's a chicken and egg conversation. People are interested in health insurance. They should be asking themselves, well, how would I possibly contribute into one at the price points I'm making? This is what I mean. It's all about this idea of refreshing our idea of ourselves as economic actors. Right? We participate in an economy. And a lot of us come to this because we loved doing it, right? We were students of the theater. We made student work. We did university stuff. It was a fun thing to do. Right, but then turning that corner into professionalism, we forget that actually there's a whole set of premiums here that need to support that fund. And I think part of the job of the Guild is to kind of like activate that in people, and again, not fall into citing Marsha Norman, she would always talk about the grateful trap. That as an artist, you're asked to be grateful that someone's giving you a chance to basically exploit your work. And at the end of the day, it's not about being grateful. It's about remembering that what you're doing is actually the thing adding value, right? And when you start from there, ask yourself what you deserve, because you should be able to sustain your life on the work that you do like everyone else in the world, right? And it's very hard for playwrights and dramatists to do that.
Yeah, I remember there was one production that my collaborator and I were negotiating with the producer, and everything was going okay until he said, by the way, I'm not planning on giving you any royalties. And we said, what? No, I'll produce your play, but so we said, that's not going to work for us. And then suddenly he said, well, my passion for your piece has now changed. Yeah. Like, really?
But I think it's worth clocking that there's a whole class of producers who've been trained to try to exploit us that way. Yes. Like he tried something.
It's like for the honor of you.
Yeah, but he knew that he had at least try to get you to cheat yourself.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's the standard practice. And listen, I've been on various boards and have friends in various places, and you see that in a lot of these producers now are calculating their budgets based on not paying the writer. Right?
Yes.
This is a standard.
Yes. Say more.
Meaning, I've seen decks for sheets for investments for Broadway shows where you look at what they expect to compensate the writer, and it is minimums. They are telling investors that they're not going to pay more than minimums.
That's right.
That's
through,
so we're part. So the exploitation of
through
writers
amortization. Is
yeah,
that right?
exactly. So
Yes.
which did not exist in 19 whatever.
Maybe you should
when
speak
you know.
about what that is for the listener who might not know what that is.
I can't really speak about. I mean,
I'm not an
Yeah,
expert
maybe
on it,
not
but
the
it
it ain't good for writers.
It ain't good for writers. I will just say the general idea is that investors you're treated as an investor, the playwright, and the people who put money in are paid back before you see anything other than minimums, even if you have written a big fat hit, which is a hit show, which is why when we say you can't make a killing these days, it is largely because of amortizations.
Right. So you actually, I think, described it very well from
Thank you,
what
'cause
I understand too.
That's the end of that. That's all.
Yeah.
Yeah, but again, the exploitation of writers is being baked into the business models people are using to raise money. That, to me, is a real crime, right? And we think about the fact that producers expect to participate in the life of your work beyond its producing. Ask yourself, well, where do you make any money in these scenarios, right? We all know someone who's involved in a show that has made upwards of $50 million in its run and has been paid not even 1% of that.
Yeah.
That's tough.
So let's talk about what we think we might be able to do to help shift the culture around that. And I also have another question that you might be able to answer for me, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's about acknowledging that people don't know what they don't know, right? And it's our job to educate ourselves. We can't depend on our agents, as lovely as they may be. Mm-hmm. We can't depend on the producers. We can't depend on our directors, right? There's no one else who understands, honestly, how we get compensated. And so we have to do the work of asking ourselves, well, how do we get compensated? Where do we talk about money honestly with each other? I think we're trained to believe that we're somehow in competition with each other, but we all know that's not really true.
Right.
Because
only you have written your play.
Exactly.
Only you have written your play.
And even literally people who I've been in competition with for shows, once they get the show or I get the show, it's done.
Yeah,
the competition's over, and then they're that person writing the show, and I'm the person writing that show. Yeah. Right. And we are all. I mean, that is really the great thing about the Guild, is that we are here for the betterment of all writers. Like, don't take this deal because you will screw 100 other people who come after you. So we are looking at contracts and making sure that they will not exploit others, not only ourselves, but the other fellow playwrights.
That is something that I really think is important to think about, individualism versus collectivism, because I think that we are obviously all singular people writing our own plays and trying to get our own work out there. But there is something about the power of collectivism and us standing together and knowing what we know about each other's work so that it can help us figure out how to help more people.
And the truth is that we should always be fighting to improve the possibility for a livelihood in this field. Mm-hmm. It's not just about what's, like you said, the contract I take is going to affect the contracts because it's going to set a precedent for people.
Yes.
Right? So what can you do to knowing how hard it was for you to spend 7 years making a musical, how do you help the person next to you have an easier 7 years?
Yeah.
Right? That's really the spirit, I think, of the Guild, is we know we are the only ones who know how hard it is to tell a story the way that we do. Right? Yeah. How much time it takes, the late nights. If you tried to make an hourly wage,
don't do it.
Don't do it.
It'll only be sad.
And we've all been in situations with a collaborator who wants to pitch a story idea, and you're going like, you don't know what you're talking about, But it's like, how do we really give that value and honor that thing that we've all dedicated so much time to understanding and learning and celebrating? I
think also as information sharing, we can't collectively bargain, but the more you're aware of what's out there, the more power you have to ask for something that's audacious, but really fair, just fair. But I mean, I know, like, I'm empowered by hearing people's stories and I mean, the people who have, it's just that, the Guild was founded by these writers who were just being, totally taken advantage of, who just were audacious enough to say, no, I'm asking for this and I'm demanding this, and they were a group of writers. But if one person is brave, then that begets bravery, hearing of somebody who's like, I'm not going to have that in my contract. And you're like, oh shit, you asked for that and you got that? So.
That's the point of being able to possess your own copyright, is you have the right to establish the terms and value of your work. And people want to tell you like, wow, that's too expensive for the field, but who cares?
What do you mean? Why would that be?
Because, what's the theory is that Amanda Green can write whatever she wants and go, I'm selling this for $1 million, right? Now listen, market forces are what market forces are.
Hello?
But in theory, that's the right of owning your own work. You should set the terms and value of it. People may not want to buy it, but that's your work. You decide. No one knows how you made it but you, right? And I feel like what you'll encounter is people going like, that's absurd. I can pay Bobby Joe Bobby.
Love their work. Love their work.
For that exact musical, but we both know that those musicals are different musicals.
Yeah.
Right? So this is a very convoluted way of just saying we get to say to our agents and to our producers, actually I don't accept that contract. There's no standard here because my work is not standard. I own it, I set the terms of its value. And if you want this work, you have to do this. It gives you more negotiating power. Whereas with the union, you're really standardizing those things, right? You're saying like, well, all of you guys lift boxes. So that's the one skill set you got to offer as a union. Well, you all are gonna lift boxes for the same price,
We're gonna make stationery that says, there is no standard because my work is not standard.
Basically,
Love
that's the
Branden.
point. That's the point.
I think that's fantastic. Let's talk about all of the good things that are happening in the theater right now, because I do think that we're making plays right now is actually
and musicals
and music. Well, I'm using that as an umbrella. No, I'm using it as an umbrella.
Here.
I write musicals too.
Yeah, this one writes.
But it seems almost an act of resistance to be making plays right now because we're talking. I'm going to veer into the censorship discussion adjacent to this because I do feel like censorship is also something that we at the Guild have been fighting against since the dawn of the formation of the Guild, and that the DLDF, the Dramatists Legal Defense Fund, which is under our umbrella, is really working hard to stay abreast of the daily changes in the culture. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to talk about what changes you may or may not have seen that have to do with censorship in all forms, because sometimes it might seem subtle. Sometimes it might seem like, well, we're just not programming plays like that, or we're not programming things about that subject. And it's not the definition of censorship, but it does feel to me like it is part of what's in the zeitgeist right now.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that I've had a number of meetings with artistic directors. And every time I meet an artistic director, I'm curious about what they're seeing, and what they think they have too much of, what they don't want to see. And I've had multiple ADs at this moment say to me, like, I'm really tired of plays about identity politics, which is code.
Yes. Yes, please elaborate.
Well, it's just code, right? For it's like, well, and what they're not being held accountable here for is their own choices in programming. Did you choose the plays and support the plays and give context to the plays that allowed your audiences to understand what was happening? Or did you throw up tokens and then did no work to bridge the gulf between the artist and the audiences, right? And you created an experience of alienation which drove your ticket sales down. It's like that kind of. And so now it's the people being punished for that or the artists making the work, as opposed to the institution addressing its own kind of structural creakiness, its squeaky wheels, if you will, right? Mm-hmm. But I don't love hearing that, because I'm like, no, I think identity politics are not going away, but what is it that you want to move forward aesthetically in the form? Like, what is it that how could these plays do better for you, right? Why is it just that suddenly work about people of color is something you want to see less of? That's how it sounds.
Yeah, I mean, all theaters. You've had again much more experience, but some theaters were performative, and they're like, okay, we did that, we didn't know what to do with it, right. Moving on. Right. And then some theaters have embraced diversity and are doing really exciting work by people, from just across the board, and subjects that are across the board, and cultures that are across the board. And it's good work is just fucking good work.
Yeah. And the truth is, not all theaters are doing poorly. Theaters are doing well, theaters that program well. And actually those theaters are programming quite diversely in all ways, right? Yeah. And what happens, though, is the theaters that don't do well blame the artists.
Right. Yeah.
And not how they program.
And then they do, the same 5 plays that
are
done in every
theater across the country. So it just reinscribes a kind of culture that I think becomes even harder for artists to address,
Have you had those conversations with people in your outside voice? Or have you know what I'm saying? When you've heard...
you have to ask yourself how much it's worth it, right?
Yeah, right, yes.
Sometimes they're old dogs, and we know what they say about old dogs. Mm-hmm. I think that the other thing about theater, too, is it moves quite slowly. Mm-hmm. So people plan their seasons a year in advance. Right. So it's hard to name the trend until it's in front of you, right? I'm telling you what I'm sensing happen based on these conversations. But it's not everyone I'm talking to says that. Course. But I'm shocked by how many meetings like that I've had in the last 6 months,
So Amanda, you have this musical, Regency Girls, which you have also described often as the abortion musical.
Yes, right? yes. And not when I'm trying to sell tickets, no, but it's a musical about bodily autonomy and reproductive freedoms, and it's a comedy and it's fun. But yes, so we just did it in San Diego at the Old Globe, and I was like, and Appropriate was playing there, and I was really heartened just by Appropriate is playing there. The audience was mostly older white people, and they fucking loved Appropriate. And they, and then we did this musical about a musical comedy about abortion. And then they fucking loved it, And some younger people, I don't know. And then there was, there was a play by an Indian playwright being done after me, and it just was it was called I forget the name of it, The House of India. But just so I was like, there is an audience, and people do like it because I'm playing with the courts. Just hands up.
No, you're doing great now. You're doing great. I love it. Because it's who you are. You're so passionate. I love it.
Anyway, so there is an audience and diverse audience. There's got to be a diverse audience, but you can teach some old dogs some new tricks because people love theater and they love good theater, and a good story is a good story.
How big was the house for Regency Girls? Do you remember?
How big?
How big was the seating?
It was in the same theater as Appropriate, so I think it was 400 or 500.
Yeah, I always find it very funny that we're talking about rooms that only seat 400 people in cities with populations in the millions, and everyone acts like there's not an audience. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm I'm sure there's 400 people in your town that might want to see this musical.
They did.
And there's just always this illusion that we can't find the audiences. I'm like, how many people? I literally compared the theater size to the population on Wikipedia of the town. Right. And I'm like, are you telling me you cannot fill this seat with anyone in this town?
Well, also marketing.
Well, that's what I was going to say. So I know we're all over the place, but I love it.
Yeah.
But it's true. But marketing is everything. So if you're not marketing to, we've talked about this actually before in other
Are there no
seasons.
Churches? Every time there's a black play, right? They go to the black churches.
Who are you thinking you really are trying to get into this theater? Based on what?
They tried to make my actors, who they, by the way, were told that they were not worth $10,000 a month billboard in Times Square, that they should go to churches on their day off to advertise the show. And the actor said no. Because also that's such an old school, tin-eared way. As if people at church don't have Instagram. As if they themselves are not being targeted on Facebook.
Exactly, yeah.
It was just this weird, fossil of an idea. And it's such an indicative, just it indicates to me the brain drain of some of the marketing in our field. And it honestly happens in development too, I'll be honest. I feel like the money for your show should not be raised by the playwright. If you have a staff of people who get, 5 figures a year to fundraise.
So two things we're going to talk about right now. Two things we're going to talk about right now. We are going to get back to us having to fundraise for our own shows and bring, what's it called? enhancement money.
Yeah.
But I do want to talk about marketing first. How have you interacted with the people who are doing marketing for your shows, and do you have words of advice, insight for playwrights who are going to be talking to marketing, how to best express what you want to see in the marketing?
I mean, get in there early. Get in early. I mean, this is one of those moments where we really do need to call that bluff that we're producers, right? Because producers are in there early. You should be in that first meeting with your producer or theater and being like, what's the plan? You know, because the thing about marketing is if it's too late, it's just too late, you know? And there's nothing, such thing as too early. I think you should be studying the marketing of other places and how that theater already markets. You know, look at how they announce their season. Look at the key art they've done in the past. Like, you know, is it really servicing those plays if you happen to know those plays? Talk to other writers who've been there. You know, I think that you have to really, it's not okay to go to a meeting just be kind of a bitch. You know, I think you want to be an informed bitch. And so the work you have to do is to prep for those meetings and say, you did this, was it successful? You did this, it wasn't successful. Why? How do we avoid that now? Because the truth is, people forget that for you, this is something you've worked on for 3 years, and it's hopefully the flowering of this great long process. But for these people who work on these theaters, it's one of 6 things they got to do this year.
Right.
You know, and that helps you both respect that thing, but also figure out where the pressure points are. So once you're done, there's going to be another poster design. There's going to be another show to market, you know, and how do you help be a part of their flow? You know, how do you set them up for, like, a genius at this was actually Jocelyn Bio. I don't know if you know the player Jocelyn Bio, who,
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, she does as much marketing as those marketing departments, and she knows exactly where to go, where to show her face. She tells them, get on this radio station, because she's a consumer in that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, she's like, I know where I'm advertised to, and you're not at. So please, here's where I think you should try to do it.
That's so smart.
And it makes it. I mean, she's famous for bringing in first-time ticket buyers, but then it's like it's up to that marketing department to sustain that, right? But
I've been working, you know, with this marketing department for Regency Girls. I'm very happy with them, and but the thing that we had to say, my collaborators and I, also to the producers, was like, we're the North Star about what the tone is of the show, what the show is about. Like, marketing departments, they know lots of things I don't know, but they can't tell me what my show is about. And sometimes I've heard things that are so, like, I've been surprised, you know, unpleasantly surprised, you know, in other shows where, like, that's not my show. No, and that's not my humor, and that's not what it should look like. And you have to, we had to stick our foot in the door and say, no, we need to be in these meetings. And, you know, you can push back, you can agree or disagree, but we've got to tell you what we think the show is. And, you know, once people see a show, and then it's easier for them to market, but especially if it's a new show, you are the authority.
One of the things I've been working on with APAC, Asian American Performance Action Coalition, is a theater practices toolkit for the care and feeding of the Asian American artists. But one of the things is, one of my colleagues, Nandi Disha, and I came up with, we were talking to a lot of people about what they're experiencing, and one of the things was playwrights and marketing. And she just said, if I can get nothing else but this message out, no more chop suey font, I will be happy, because you would be surprised at how
and what's
much
crazy is I know exactly the
Yes,
font
you
you're
know
talking about.
exactly.
Yes.
I'm seeing it.
Oh
Isn't
my
it a
gosh.
takeout container?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh my
And
God.
so, you know,
Right.
Chop
it has
suey
been
font.
so synonymous with an Asian-themed play or musical that we're just like, let's just stop. And but I love all of these insights and pieces of advice, because I think people really, people I think are sometimes afraid of standing up for themselves in these ways, and you mentioned this before, to know that it's not only okay, it's really
I tell
essential.
you guys hear me talk about this all the time, that, like, for whatever reason, we are the most, like, abused part of this field. The amount of things that happen in a room where some playwright have an amazing idea, and then I'll be like, great, you should do it, and they're like, I'm not the one to do it. It's like, but you have the idea. You have the idea. You are capable of doing it. Why did you just doubt yourself in that way? And it's like, there's so much fear in our industry. And I'm like, why? And that's honestly what I wish the Guild would be for people. It's like, you feeling scared? Come talk to us. We'll tell you how not to be scared, you know? And that was the great gift that my mentors gave me, you know, was like, stop apologizing. Stop thanking everybody. You did the work. You are the reason why people have jobs. You know, own that. That's a gift. You know what I mean? Anyway.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to circle back to something you mentioned about fundraising for your own play and being expected to do that and or bring enhancement money. Anything you want to
Well, it's not even just about your show. Anytime you're invited to a gala, anytime you're invited to some salon at somebody's house, you are being used as bait for donors. Because everyone thinks donors want to be around the creatives, they want to be around arts, and you are not paid for that. You know, a bunch of pigs in a blanket is not enough. You know, and I think for me, I one of the first things I do when I go to theaters, I look at the staff page and the playbill, and I'm like, how many people they hire, how many people work here, and how many artists did they employ in their season? And if that number is crazy far off, something is wrong at that theater. Because these development offices are 8, 10, 15 people deep, and I'm still being asked to raise $100,000 because the theater can't afford my set. I'm like, well, well, give me one of your development associates' salaries or fire them and use that money on my show, right? If you really start thinking about the dollar for dollar value of what you're doing, it's hideous in that way. And there's a theater that I'm going to be very kind to not name right now, but I was told I needed to raise money for lav mics for my show.
No.
And I should sell the audio rights to Amazon Audible. Yes. And by the way, and that money would not go to me. The money that I'm selling the audio will go to the show.
Oh.
And they said, well, you know, the last 3 artists last 3 playwrights did this. I called all those playwrights up. I was like, excuse me, did you raise X number of dollars for this theater? And they were like, yeah, I was told that everyone did it. And I said, how much did you make on the show? And it was nowhere near the amount of money they raised. Right? That's crazy.
Wow. So wait,
Crazy.
I don't think you said yes.
Spoiler
alert.
Well, listen, I can't say what I did because I might get sued. But I did not.
But you did not.
No, they didn't. Amazon does not own the rights to my show.
But you did not say yes. But your play still was done.
Yes, it was.
That's
because
what I wanted
it's
to
all
get across.
yes, it's all smoke and mirrors. There's no budget transparency for writers, right?
None.
If we're producers, we're looking at budgets.
Right.
If you were really a producer, you'd be looking at a budget.
Yeah.
So people say all kinds of stuff to you. Like, I love when producers say to me, like, I'm not gonna do that, it's too expensive. I'm like, well, I don't know how expensive it is because I haven't seen a budget. So if you wanna share a budget with me, we can talk about how to make it cheaper. Never hear that again from them. Right, I never hear it again, right? But that kind of game of making it seem like you're so expensive,
Yes.
even though you know how much money you're getting paid, that practice is very widespread, and that's one of the things I want to dissolve from the
It's
industry.
true. The amount of free things we are expected to do on top of everything else we mentioned, the places to go and the people to glad hand and the things to do. Yep.
Do you have any ideas of how we can start doing that, dismantling it? Aside from speaking about it, which I think is actually really the first step.
That's a huge part of it, because I think there's a lot of shame. No one likes to admit they were rolled, right? You know what I mean? But you gotta come.
My name is Amanda, and I've been rolled.
But you gotta start talking about. You gotta let the shame go and go. I made a bad decision, guys, and I regret it. And in the spirit of no one else making this decision, I gotta tell my story. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think we have to build that practice into each other, and also encourage each other to say no to things. And we just have to talk about our experiences as writers, and we just don't do that. We for some reason we don't talk about money because it's the polite thing to do, but it's time to talk about it, honestly.
I was offered something for a musical I worked on, and it was like to put it out there widely, and they wanted to pay me nothing. They were like, oh, nothing. But if it sells 1 million units, then maybe we'll.
Maybe we will.
Well, yes, we will. The odds of 1 million units being sold are 1 million to 1. So I just said no.
No.
And then they were like, okay, well, how's $10,000? I was like, better than nothing.
Better than nothing. Yeah. That's what's crazy to me is like I have producers come to me all the time being like, we have this random book we bought at an airport. Want to do the musical? And I come and I go, well, what's the idea? And they're like, well, we don't have an idea. So I'm going, wait a minute, you just have a book you bought? Did you read the book? What's the book about? Why do you think it's a musical? And I'm supposed to come in and do all the creative and intellectual labor, and then you get to participate for 50 years and 50%? Like, are you joking me? Like, no, the answer is no. You know, it's also, I could by myself write a play for free by myself and Uber at night, you know, and get paid. And then when that thing is incredible, I can create a bidding war between all of you idiots, right? I shouldn't call them idiots, but you know what I mean? But you know, for me, I'm like, why? So why would I just do? Why would I get in bed with you now when you bring nothing to the table? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's a weird thing where you're like, why is that a practice? Why do you think you can do that to me? Why do you think you can go to Amanda Green and ask her to write a musical for you for free that she's going to be contractually bound to you for? I mean, no, it doesn't make any sense.
Well, we have a system that is set up where if someone comes to you and says, would you like to write blank the musical, you're supposed to be excited.
Whereas you could write your own musical and be excited about your own musical. You know?
Yeah, I think yes, and
I mean, there are ideas and ideas.
Yeah,
there are some ideas that are wonderful,
Yes,
and I'm
of
like,
course.
yes, I'd be very excited to write that. Yeah,
and I think there's also another part of the conversation about access that some people have or don't have to some opportunities, and they might want to jump in because they feel like this will be their chance to have an opportunity.
Totally.
And we can't really.
Yes, but I think I
that.
think that there's ways to qualify that.
Yes, I'm not arguing with you. I'm just
but why the
adding to
Guild is important? Because there are bad actors in the field, and how are you going to know that as a young writer who's being promised the career of you're going to be the next Stephen Sondheim if you work with Bobby Joe Bow on
love their work.
Blue Couch the musical. So give us 15 years of your life, 24-year-old. We're going to pay you $0. You're going to turn down work because we're promising you all this. Yeah. You get to the end of those 15 years, nothing happens. Yeah. How would you know that unless you talked to a writer and said, does anybody know Bobby Joe?
100%. You can't, I mean, we're all looking, especially when you're young or you don't have access and someone's like, feels like they're throwing you a lifeline. Yeah. It can be, very exciting and a very sort of shiny seeming carrot when somebody is like, oh, they're hiring me. That means I'm a professional playwright. But, 9 times out of 10, the thing that you're burning to write is better than that thing.
That's right.
Any parting words that you want to say?
Join the Guild if you're not already a member.
Abso-freaking-lutely. Yeah. And if you don't like what the Guild is doing, then join the Guild and make it better.
Yeah, that's right.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you every 5 minutes.
Exactly.
Thank you so much to all our guests this season. This podcast is sponsored by the Dramatists Guild Foundation, a nonprofit organization that fosters playwrights, composers, lyricists, and librettists at all stages of their careers. DGF supports these writers with financial grants, free space to create new works, and career resources and programs. If you are a dramatist seeking support or are a lover of theater who wants to support the future of storytelling, visit dgf.org or follow at dgfound to learn more. Talkback is executive produced by me, Christine Toy Johnson, and edited and recorded by Bruce Johnson. Our music is by Andrea Daly. As always, to be continued.